So in today's video, we are going to talk about how to deploy your code in ECS Docker.
And what all other services you have to configure on top of it so people can access from outside, from internet, they can come to your Docker. So imagine that your Docker images are here, but before you can take them to AWS, this is your machine, maybe they are compiled and everything is running fine. Make sure that you run your Docker in your machine and have them access, because that will make sure that your port and protocol, everything is properly configured and you can access your Docker. So that's important to check before you take them to AWS. So anyway, when you want to bring them to AWS, the first thing you have to do is you have to go to ECR. This is Elastic Container Registry. And then you open a account there, create a registry. So once the registry is created, you can create the Docker on your machine and you can push them to the registry. And of course, for that, you have to have a proper identity defined. First of all, in AWS, go and define an identity which can create the registry and label the container images and push them to the registry. Now, once your container are in the registry, second thing you have to do is you have to define a task definition file. Task definition. This is a task definition. Initially, first time when you do it in UI. Afterwards, you can start creating this task definition using JSON. So what task definition defines is actually it tells what kind of machine you need, what OS should be running, what port should be open, how much RAM, how much disk, and all those things you will define in the task definition. In task definition, you will also define about your environment variables, the environment variable which you want to pass to these Docker. Because when these Dockers are pushed into registry, they will using the task definition, they'll start running. So there has to be a way for them to get the environment variable. Now, there is another option. You can put them in the Docker file itself, but the better idea, better recommendation is use the task definition to push the configuration values into the Docker. Don't hard code, don't try to pass a configuration file directly in the Docker, because this way it gives you another abstraction layer, you can change it. And the task definition goes in the code. We'll talk about it more. Of course, you will not put the secrets in the JSON file, which will go in the Git. The secrets will remain in the secrets manager, and there's a way you can get the secrets out of the secret manager. But for now, for this discussion, let's say you have a task definition defined. Using this task definition, you will define multiple tasks. This is task one, this is task two. You can have as many tasks as you want, which is using task definition to define this task. And all these different tasks can be bundled together, something called services. This service. So imagine service is nothing but a bag of tasks. Like in one service, you can have multiple tasks. Think service is like that. So service is basically pointing to your different tasks, and the service takes care of a lot of other things. Like it makes sure that you will, whatever you have configured in the service, that at any given time, I want 3 tasks must be running, and the service takes care of it, making sure that you will have 3 tasks all the time running. And if one task goes down, it will create another instance and all that. So before you define the services, you have to go and define a cluster. Here's a cluster. And you define this cluster in ECS, Elastic Container Services. And the container in the cluster, you're just basically defining that you need a cluster of machines, a cluster which will running my services. There are multiple ways to define the cluster. There are 3 ways. Today, I will take Fargate, which is serverless cluster option. Basically, in Fargate, you just say, I need a cluster which can run the services, and that's it. So it's much simpler. You don't have to do any maintenance or anything. After that, there are two other options. We will see more about them in detail, but for simpler options, just imagine you create a cluster and the cluster defines a service. And the service, as you can see, it keep going to the Dockers. Now, once your cluster is defined, your service is defined, everything is good, everything is working. When you define the cluster and service, you will still get an IP address, and you can hit the IP address from outside to see whether you are reaching to your Docker or not. Okay. But before we go and call it a day, on top of this, we have to define another service called load balancer. So the load balancer will be having a concept of listeners. It has multiple listeners, which will be bundled again into a target group, target groups. So in load balancer, you will be defining listeners and target groups. So load balancer knows what port to listen to and where to forward the calls. Now, on top of this, you will have a Route 53. This is your Route 53. This is your DNS. So when somebody types the website address of yours, so for example, if somebody types certify2win.com, the call comes because of DNS configuration. Wherever you have bought the domain, you'll go and put this Route 53 address. So the call will come here in this Route 53. Route 53 has a configuration of load balancer, so it's going to forward the call to one of the load balancer. And load balancer knows that I have to go to this cluster because you configure that using the listener. And from cluster, it goes to the service. And from service, it goes to the task, which is using task definition. And then you reach to your Docker. And depending on how you have opened the ports and all those things, everything works fine and you go back. Now, as you can see, there are multiple layers are there and there's a very big opportunity to make mistake. One mistake often we all make figuring out all this is about the security. Because if you will see at every layer, you will have security group defined. Like here, if your security group is not properly defined, that it can accept the call from outside, the ports and the protocols not properly open, the call will be blocked here itself. And same thing will happen at every layer. You have to have a proper security defined. AWS is very big on the security, and I think it's a good thing, but you have to make sure that you are using proper security group. Second thing is you have to have a proper virtual private network, VPNs defined, that where is your load balancer is sitting, where is your cluster is sitting. All these things should be in a proper VPN. So initially, let's keep things simple that imagine everything is in one VPN, because once you understand all this, you can, create as complex this drawing as you want. You can have different VPN and these services and tasks can sit in different places. All that is fine. So this can be pretty daunting for somebody who's just coming first time with the Docker to deploy. It's great documentation in AWS about all this, but there is so much, and there's a very high chance of you making a mistake and going in a completely wrong direction, and you will may spend maybe hours and days figuring out what's wrong, why things are not working, because these things were not very cleanly laid out the way I am laying out here. Because I'll give you an example. When you're defining the services, you can define about load balancer also. And when you define the load balancer, you can define the listener also. So all those two things which is on top in yellow, you can define while defining the services. And it throws you off because if you are defining services and you don't know yet about load balancer, suddenly they talk to you about load balancer. So you wonder what to do. Initially, it looks very complex, but once you do it, it becomes simple because, as you said, as you've seen, I talked about these JSON files are there. So all those things are defined in JSON. Once they are defined, they just work. It's like repeat and rinse, repeat and rinse. They go all in Git, and then you set up some Git action and things happen seamlessly. The problem is only for the first time, or the first time when you came in. And I think this is the artificial complexity set up just so, filter out people who are not passionate and dedicated to understand these things. Because once you understand, it's all very, very simple. Stay with me. So let's talk about each of these services and we'll go in AWS and look at them, how we will do the registry task definition, we'll define the service, load balancer, listener, and Route 53. We'll see all these, uh, every of them configuration and how to define them and see how all this can be deployed easily using GitHub Actions and all that.